All right, appreciate everybody coming out for Coach Franklin's weekly press conference. We'll get started with an opening statement from Coach, and then we'll go to the Zoom. Coach?
So first of all, like always, appreciate everybody that's here in person in town, and obviously everybody that's on Zoom as well covering Penn State football. We appreciate it. I'll make a couple statements and then obviously take questions. NBC will be broadcasting its first game ever in Beaver Stadium, which is cool and kind of shocking when I saw that, to be honest with you. You guys had asked about the red, yellow, green list, so I wanted to follow back up on that. The guys that right now have been green lighted, I'll probably just keep it to that, is Tony Rojas, King Mack, Zion Tracy, and Elliott Washington. Just to answer that question, I wanted to follow back up because I didn't have that information for you guys the other day when you asked. Excited about having Tom Bradley, Scrap, and Allen Robinson being the honorary captains. That should be really cool. Obviously, getting a guy like Allen Robinson back is always important, but then having a guy like Scrap, who I've been able to develop a relationship since I came into town, obviously with his history and connections to the program is awesome as well, and I'm glad we're doing that. And when you get into West Virginia, and obviously Neil Brown, I got a ton of respect for Neil, his background as an offensive coordinator and as a head coach. Got a lot of respect. Obviously, this is a regional game, which I think makes sense. I know college football's gotten away from the regional type games and the regional conferences. But I think it makes sense for both schools from a travel perspective as well. From what I understand, Neil will be calling the plays this year, which is really his background. They returned 16 starters. They ended the year with a really good win on the road at Oklahoma State, which is a tough place to play. Got a bunch of starters back, got a transfer. You guys probably remember a receiver named Devin Carter that they got, that we were involved in that process as well. They got some offensive linemen that we recruited heavily, and didn't get those young men to come to Penn State, and are playing well for them, especially up front. They're predominantly 11 personnel spread team, RPO-based offense. If you look at statistically what they do best, at least from last year, is the red zone. They were first in the Big 12 and 12th overall in FBS, and then fourth down conversions, 68%. They were first in the Big 12 and 10th nationally. So I would anticipate in this type of game that they're going to go forward on fourth down. That's something that they have confidence in doing, and I think that's going to play a factor in this game. Obviously, Garrett Green, the quarterback, who I would anticipate is going to be the starter in this game, that'll be a big storyline. Got a ton of respect for the running back, C.J. Donaldson, which has kind of got an interesting story if you guys don't know this, but came in there as a tight end, got moved to running back, and has played very well for them. And then back to the offensive line with those young men that we just got done talking about. Defensively, Jordan Leslie, who's been there now for a couple years as the defensive coordinator, 6 returning starters. The middle linebacker, number 1, extremely productive. Koba, he's an impressive player. Has made a ton of plays for him. Young man out of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. The safety, number 2, Aubrey Banks. The defensive end, number 10, Jared Bartlett. And then another young man that we recruited, number 91, Sean Martin, is a very productive defensive lineman that we're very familiar with. And then special teams, Jeff Kuntz, 5 starters. They're really the complete opposite of us. They got everybody back, long snapper, punter, kicker, return men. They're all back, so experienced in that area. Preston Fox, the punt returner, he was 3rd in the Big 12 and 24th nationally in punt returns, so that'll be a challenge. And then they have an Australian punter, number 41, Oliver Straw, who has the ability to do the variety of Australian-style kicks that can be challenging and problematic. So we're excited to be in game week. We obviously went on Sunday. Yesterday was the players' off day. And then, we're back into practice today. Today's a work day for us. So appreciate you guys being here and happy to answer any questions that you may have.
All right, we'll go to the Zoom. We'll start with Rich Scarcella, and then Mark Wogenrich, you're on deck.
Good afternoon, James. How are you today?
Good, Rich. How are you, man? I'm
great, thanks. James, can you please evaluate the preseason performance of Drew Aller?
Yeah, I think you guys know this. This is something that I probably drive everybody crazy about, but we basically keep a record of everything. So every throw, completion percentage, touchdown to interception ratio, explosive plays. We even track, what we would say. Okay, so I guess what I'm saying is you have interceptions, which are easy to track. Well, if there were interception decisions in terms of he threw the ball and he was fortunate that the DB dropped it, but that was a intercepted or an intercepted type throw, then we track that as well to make sure that we're able to kind of have an understanding of decision making as well. And he's been really, really good. His decision making's been good. His completion percentage has been really good. And then another thing that's really cool is having all this data, then you're able to go back and compare to historical data. You're able to compare it to Trace McSorley. You're able to compare it to Sean Clifford, so on and so forth. So I think there's a ton of value in that in terms of trying to get an idea of how you are in camp. We're different in college football, obviously, than the NFL, where you have a preseason and you kind of got a pretty good understanding of how you are. When you're going against yourself, sometimes that's hard to tell. Are you going against a really good defense? Are you going against a poor defense? And obviously, you guys know I don't feel that way about our defense. But my point is sometimes it's hard to really kind of have an idea of how good you are or what some of the challenges may be. So I thought he had a great camp. All his numbers were really good. And, there's been some great situations that have come up in terms of how we cover situational football, whether it's 2-minute or 4-minute, how to manage all those types of things. And again, I think going against a really good defense and a really good defensive back unit has been a ton of value in that. And I think what we do defensively, testing protections in terms of pressures and disguising coverages, it's challenging for a young quarterback. So I think all those things have been really valuable, and hopefully we'll put our QBs in the best position to be successful. But I think Drew's had I would say a good camp, and a camp that's given himself and the coaches and his teammates a bunch of confidence. So I hope that answers your question.
All right, we'll go to Mark Wogenrich, and then Frank Bodani, you're on deck.
Hi, James. How are you?
Good, Mark. How are you?
Good, thanks. The weekly release this week noted Mike Yursich move into the booth this season. What prompted that decision, and then what role does Danny O'Brien play with that?
Yeah, I think two things. I think it's a good question, and I think it's a good follow-up question as well. I think Danny's been a big part of that. Danny now spending over a year with Mike and knowing how Mike wants to do things. Danny playing for me, coaching for me. There's a lot of alignment there and has built a ton of respect with our quarterbacks. So I think that's played a big part in it. But it's probably one of the things that I'm most excited about. I think as an offensive coordinator specifically, there's no better place to call the game than in the booth. Controlled environment, you got your notes out, you can see it all. You're not relying on somebody else to echo information to you that maybe you can't see across the field, the corners alignment, the far safeties alignment. You're able to rely on your vision and your information. There's still going to be people up there helping them, but I also think it's Mike's respect for our staff and our assistant coaches that there's strong voices, including Danny on the sideline to manage that. But I think it's ultimately Mike saying, where can I be the best offensive coordinator and where can I call the best game? And it's from the booth. And this was something, it's not like we talked about it and then he came back to me. He came to visit with me about it. He said, "This is what I'm thinking. What are your thoughts?" And I was on board because as an offensive play caller, I don't even think it's close. I think it's the best place to call the game from.
Let's go to Frank Bodani and then Mike Gross. You're on deck.
Hey, good afternoon, James.
Hey, Frank.
Thank you.
How are you, man?
Hey. Good, real good. So you mentioned about Drew's camp being good. Is he your official starter for the season, for the beginning of the season? Is that a decision you're going with publicly? And how close is the competition with him and Bo?
Yeah, he's had a really good camp. I'm not making any announcements at this time. But yeah, he's had a really good camp. I do think it's been good competition, and like I've told you guys all camp, not only has Bo done some nice things, and Bo brings an element, that maybe Drew doesn't have, and maybe even factoring those things in. I think sometimes as a running quarterback like Trace was and like Bo is. Sometimes those things are hard to evaluate in practice because you don't really see them. It's not like he's out there making people miss and breaking tackles in practice, which I think is a little bit of his style. He really reminds me of a bigger Trace. But also, like I've told you guys all camp, is I think Jackson Smolik's had a really good camp too, which is nice because we think we got three quarterbacks that have all shown signs that we can win with. I think the game would be different. And I think that is challenging as an offensive coordinator is how do you have enough within your system to take advantage of the strengths of all your quarterbacks. And, we want to make sure that we have game plans that play to all three of their strengths. So that's challenging.
Let's go to Mike Gross and then Donnie Collins. You're on deck.
Hi, James. How are you?
Good, Mike. How are you?
Good, thanks. Last week there was a report about the NCAA academic progress rate numbers, and for 21-22, and they were not good relative to the Big Ten, and also I think relative to other years in your time here. So. With that in mind, do you have any reaction to that? Is that in any way deceptive? What's your sort of take on that?
Yeah, so I think first of all, I think everybody knows how important academics are to Penn State, the university as a whole. And when I'm saying that, I'm talking about obviously in the athletic department, and then with our football program, both present day and from a historical perspective, something that we take tremendous pride in and is very, very serious to us. And to your point, we've historically been really good in that. I think the year before COVID, I think we had a perfect 1,000 APR. So it's something that we take a lot of pride in, and obviously, we're going to spend a lot of energy and resources on getting it back where we want it to be. And Pat is aligned on that, and I'm aligned on that, and so is our staff. So we take a lot of pride in it, and we'll get it right. I think the last thing I'd say, though, is ultimately if you look at our graduation rates have really been good. The actual graduation rates, not the predictor of graduation.
Let's go to Donnie Collins and then Corey Geiger. You're on deck.
Hey, James.
How you doing?
Pretty well. How comfortable are you with where the specialists are at after camp, and kind of what you were talking about earlier with metrics? Does that when you're replacing an entire staff of specialists, does metrics make that a lot easier, or is there some factors that kind of when you're going into replacing that make it a little more difficult to tell with crowds and pressure and stuff like that?
You said staff. Did you misspeak right there? Did you mean the players?
Yeah, I kind of meant players that like staff player, like kicker, punter.
Well, we're not at that stage yet in terms of how you're defining them. But yeah, I think your point is a good one. I think the metrics help in terms of being able to say, okay, what was our kick percentage last year in games? What was it in practice? What are these guys doing it right now? I think you guys have seen, like, we try to make practice really challenging and difficult on those guys as well. So a lot of times the games are easy. I mean, as you know, whether it's music or whether it's horns or whether it's whistles or whether it's wet balls or whatever it may be, try to make it really challenging in practice. So I think that helps. But I think at the end of the day, you never truly know at any of these positions, whether it's offense, defense, or special teams, until they get out there and do it in games. But I think they have done, and we've done everything we possibly can to get them prepared for it. I think the competition that we have had in terms of going out and bringing in some veteran guys, not necessarily to take the jobs, but to come in and create a true competition between some veterans from the outside and then some guys within our program that we're growing and maturing and developing. I think that's really helped. There's been legitimate competitions at kicker, punter, snapper, and kickoff. All of them, there's been legitimate competition, which I think brings the best out in everybody and elevates the room. So, we've been pleased with it. And to your point, I think the numbers compare favorably to years past from practice.
Let's go to Corey Geiger and then Johnny McGonigal. You're on deck.
Hi, James.
Hey, Corey.
With college football changing the rule about no stoppage of the clock after first downs, there's an expectation there will be fewer plays in the game, maybe 8, 10, 12 fewer plays, one or two fewer.
I think it's being anticipated to be about 6 on either side of the ball. I think if you look at the last game that was played, I think it was about 5 if you look at the last game that was played, I think it was 5 plays on offense, so 10 plays overall. But your point is accurate. Does
that impact anything in terms of your rotations? Getting younger guys, I know you play a lot of depth, especially on defense. Does that come into play if there's fewer plays?
No, because again, it's outside of our control. We're going to do whatever we got to do to win the game and continue to develop our roster and stay fresh for the fourth quarter and stay fresh for a long season. But yeah, it makes it more difficult, right? You're going to have less opportunities. You're going to have less plays. I know we'd like to fit the football game into a tight, neat box. The NFL is fascinating that it's almost exactly the same time every single game, which I think helps. But I also don't hear anybody complaining about football and watching football and enjoying football. So I think there's reasons why we're doing it other than maybe specifically what we're stating we're doing it for.
We'll go to Johnny McGonigal, and then we'll do questions for the room.
Hey, James, how are you?
Hey, John. Good, man. You?
Good. At the top you mentioned 4 true freshmen already getting that green light. We've heard good things about them throughout the offseason. But what has Rojas, Washington, Tracy, and Mack done at this point before a game is even played to earn that green light?
Well, I think they're because there's another group, right, as you guys know, there's another group of yellow guys that you hope by game 5, game 4, game 5, somewhere around there, that they're going to be ready to be green lighted as well. What these guys, I would say, is these guys have shown that they're the closest not just to play on defense, but also have significant roles on special teams. And I think that's one of the big things out there for recruits and players, and whether it's in college or even in the NFL, there's so much value in that in terms of, okay, here's a guy that's in the 2 deep on special teams, and here's a guy that's in the 3 deep on offense or defense. He's going to play enough that it makes sense to green light him and go from game 1. He's going to get enough reps between the combination of his offensive responsibility and his special teams responsibility, or his defensive responsibility and his special teams responsibility, that everybody's comfortable with it. The coaches are comfortable with it. the players are comfortable with it, and it makes sense. So that's where those guys have been able to get the green light, is being in what I would consider the 3 deep on defense and being within the 2 deep on enough special teams units that it makes sense.
All right, if you have a question in the room here, please raise your hand. We'll get a mic to you. We'll start with Mark over here.
Hey, James. The Big Ten has a new rule about reporting participation before games. You've always been somebody who's played it kind of close to the vest with injuries and whatnot. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are, and did you kind of see this coming?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I don't really care what the rules are, just as long as everybody's following the same rules, whether that is reporting injuries or whether that's playing a 9-conference game schedule or an 8-conference game schedule. There should be more consistency across the board. This has been something that's been talked about for a long time. I think one of the reasons that I'm fine with it too is we don't really get into the specifics of the injury. It's just who's available and who's not for the most part. I think you're going to see that happen to some degree across college football. I do think it's important, like most things. Again, it should be consistent. Everybody should be doing it the same way. But no, this has been something that's been discussed for a long time in the Big Ten. I even remember back in my days in the SEC, this being discussed. So I think you're going to see this here in the next couple of years be more of a standard across college football for a lot of reasons that I think you guys are aware of.
Coach, you mentioned in your opening statement about the history between these two teams. Have you taken time in the last couple of weeks to really learn the history of Penn State-West Virginia rivalry? Have you taken time to teach the players about this rivalry? I know it's been 30 years since these two teams played.
No, because again, when you talk about history and you talk about recent history, again, I don't think there's been a game played while these guys were alive. So it's like, this is very similar to another game that we played here recently that there was a ton of questions about. We talk about the history of the game, and that's what it is. It's history. And again, that history, although it would be nice to take some time and talk about the history of college football and the history of this region and some of these games, there's just not a whole lot of value in that in terms of getting our guys ready to play this game and be successful. There's not a whole lot of storylines that would make sense for them. Besides, there's a lot of guys on their team that they know through the recruiting process or from the region, guys that they played with in high school that went there or came here. So there's a little bit of that. But no, we don't spend a whole lot of time on it because I don't think there's a whole lot of relevant information that will impact, winning.
John?
Hey, James, how are you?
Hey, John, did you get a haircut?
Yeah, I did.
Let me see. Let me see what you're working with under there. Nice.
One for like
it almost
4
looked like a total buzz cut the way that was.
Hopefully I'm a ways away from that. But
is that a shot at me?
No, just a general statement.
Okay.
A lot of people talk about Kalen King and Johnny Dixon, and for good reason. What do you expect out of Cam Miller this year, and how much does he allow you to rotate at that outside cornerback spot specifically?
Yeah, Cam's a young man that I just have so much respect for. We just got done talking about him as a coaching staff and adding him to our leadership council. He's just a very driven, motivated, high production, low maintenance young man that is maximizing his Penn State experience. He's a guy that I think is going to probably start on 4 units on special teams, which I think is very telling. I think he's a young man that's going to play a bunch for us on defense as well. So just he's a guy that's really earned everybody's respect within the program enough that he was able to play as a true freshman last year. And then I think there's a ton of confidence within his teammates and within the coaches that he's done all the right things and taken all the necessary steps to build on what he did last year. And I think he's confident, and I think his teammates are confident in him, and I think the coaches are as well. But I'm proud of him. I'm proud of him. I'm really glad that we were able to go to Florida and get him. And I'm very appreciative that his mom and dad had the confidence in us to send him here. And I may even try to, you've heard me say this before with certain guys, I may even convince mom and dad to try to have a few more because we love them that much. Send them to, the Poconos, up to one of those vacation spots, romantic vacation spot in the Poconos. They're watching right now trying to figure out what the Poconos is, but we know.
In the back, Allie.
Are you talking about East Stroudsburg?
No, I'm talking about like the resorts in the Poconos that were thriving in the 70s and 80s, which I'll leave it at that. I won't go any further.
Thank you. You're opening Under the Lights, 7:30, helmet stripe, which is a whiteout minus a couple sections. How do you manage the expectations for your guys just playing in that environment after 6-8 months without it? And is that a good thing? I mean, can it be challenging playing in that environment for yourselves?
Yeah, this is kind of like the sneaky whiteout, right? It'll be a great environment. Literally the place will be filled to capacity with Penn State fans and a few West Virginia fans as well. We know they'll travel well. There'll be great tailgating. This will be a really good example on week one why college football is so special, right? All the things that go with it, the tailgating, what it does for the town and the community and the hotels and the restaurants and all of it. It's just, it's really cool. There's really no way to prepare our guys for that, especially the guys that haven't experienced it before. Except for going into the stadium and playing in the stadium under the lights with the music playing and the crowd noise. We've done that more this camp than we've done in the past. We've had a ton of 7:30 p.m. practices, so we could get used to the sun setting, and the challenges that may come from that, and the lights, and all of it. Try to create as much of that atmosphere as we possibly can, but it's hard to replicate it. There are programs in schools all over the country that are trying to replicate what we do, and it's hard to do. So we are fortunate and blessed to have the type of support that we have from our alumni and from our lettermen and from the state of Pennsylvania and really from the region. And we don't take that for granted. But it'll be a great environment for college football, let alone specifically for Penn State and the Big Ten. So I think we've done all the things we can do. Now we just got to go do it.
Neil?
Hi, James.
Hey, Neil.
From your experience, are there advantages, especially with a young quarterback, to not disclose publicly who the starter is, or you guys really don't know yet for the next couple days?
No, we got a pretty good idea of who we're starting pretty much everywhere. I mean, as you guys know, like I've told you before, when we practice, we send some guys out with the first team. We send some guys out with the second team. We send some guys out with the third team, and most of the depth chart and roster is set. But I think more times than not, we try not to put that information out there because I don't necessarily see the value in it. And for me, the most important thing is the guys in our locker room, whether it's from a leadership or a chemistry standpoint, and we got that. So all the other stuff out there in the universe or in the internet or wherever else, I don't think that has a huge factor for us. So that's why we typically try not to do it.
In the back, T. Frank.
Straight in front of you, all the way back.
How we doing?
Good. How you doing, James?
Good.
Whoever your starting quarterback is, going off of that, first-time starter against a Big 12 defense, which typically Big 12 defense is very different than some of the things you see in the Big 10 from a coverage perspective especially. So how do you prepare those guys when it's so vastly different, especially from what your defense has shown under Manny Diaz? How do you get those quarterbacks ready for things they maybe have never seen before and probably might not see again?
Yeah, I think that's what this week is about, and really we had a couple bonus practices during training camp as well, is getting them ready for West Virginia. You know, the good-on-good work is great from a speed perspective. It's hard to replace that. But then that's why the D squad is so valuable, right? You know, it's interesting. You look at our staff and the number of guys that played in the NFL that redshirted and were on the scout team as freshmen, and it's the majority of them. So making sure that our players in our locker room embrace that role and kind of get over it, right? You get over the fact that you may redshirt, get over the fact that you may be on the scout team or the D squad this year, and give us the best look you possibly can. So play as competitive and play as fast and play as aggressive as you have been playing all training camp, but now try to do it replicating West Virginia's defense or West Virginia's offense. That's how we prepare, and between that and film, as much film study as we possibly can, that's how we're preparing them.
Audrey?
Neil took my question, so I'll follow it up. You mentioned some of the numbers earlier with Drew and historically how you guys have the data with Trace, with Sean. Are there any numbers there with either quarterback that you'd like to share that maybe they impressed you throughout camp or anything in that regard?
Yeah, I think I would say touchdown to interception ratio or just interceptions in general. You know, I want to say that we got to like practice 13 or 14, you know, I think before we, you know, had a turnover, you know, an interception specifically with Drew. So that's valuable in terms of evaluating the quarterbacks, and especially with the type of defense that we're going against every single day, and then also just, you know, the style of defense that we play, not just the personnel, but the style of defense we play. You know, we're not an access defense in terms of, you know, we're not playing quarters, we're not playing off coverage, we're not playing off man, we're not playing off, you know, cover three, where there's access, there's gimme yards that are just sitting out there to take a hitch when you want to, or things like that. We're not really constructed that way, so it makes it challenging. You have to compete for every completion. Every completion is a contested catch. I think that's good for our receivers. I think that's good for our quarterbacks. So a lot of value from it, but yeah, all those metrics are really valuable. Again, to be able to say, okay, this is what my gut is telling me, but then the numbers back it up. Or this is what my gut is telling me, and the numbers don't back that up. Let's challenge ourselves. Where it's most valuable is no different than in your industry or any industry. There are a certain number of players or in any industry that are not self-aware. And awareness is one of the most important traits and skills that we all must have to grow and evolve. And if you're not self-aware, that's where the data is really valuable, right? You're able to show the data and say, okay, you know, you think you should be starting or you think you should be playing, but here's the data, you know, that backs it up. So that's really valuable, to have honest conversations and be able to provide feedback, really for all of us, right? To study and look at and be able to challenge ourselves. So, you know, there's a ton of value in it.
Bob?
Hey, James, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm good. I know you get asked a lot about your defensive tackle rotation this offseason. What did you see from them in August? And I'm curious about guys maybe like Keziah and Devon. I know you've talked about Zane in spring and Hakeem, but your rotation in general, and maybe those two guys are veterans.
Yeah, I just think when you go back to that conversation about like 2.5 deep or 3 deep at every position, I think D tackle's a really good example of that. You know, when you look at, Zane Durant and Devon Elise and Caleb Artis and Hakeem Beeman and Jordan Vandenberg and Keziah Izzard. That's 6 guys there, and there's others that there's confidence in that, we are bigger at that position. I think we're more confident in fundamentals and techniques. And I think we have a much better understanding of the defense and how Manny wants it executed and played. I think Vandenberg may be one of the most improved guys on our roster, let alone at the defensive tackle position. And then Keziah Izzard, I think you guys have talked about this a little bit. He missed some of camp with some bumps and bruises, but miraculously he came back last week. I don't know if it was a vet move or not, where you miss most of camp and then you're running around with fresh legs looking great. But he's ready to go, and I think Keziah's got a really bright future as well. So we got a group that is bigger. You look at Hakeem Beeman and Zane Durant. They're 2 guys that are significantly bigger than they were last year, and it's good weight. It's really good weight. They don't look that much bigger, but they are, and because they put on lean mass. So I think we're in a good position there, where we got 5 to 6 guys that we feel like can all rotate and play to stay fresh. Like you guys hear me say all the time, in the fourth quarter and late in the season.
Time for 2 more. We'll go Tyler and then Ben.
Hey, James. Over here.
Hey, Tyler.
Last year, you went into the season with 2 rotations on the offensive line, left guard and right tackle. Those lasted until injuries forced one guy out of those equations. I'm curious what you learned from carrying those rotations so far into a season, and maybe carrying forward, and how that impacts your train of thought when Phil tries to get 5 to maybe 7 or 8 guys involved, come Saturday night.
Yeah, it's really just totally based on your roster, and I think when you have 7 or 8 guys that you feel like are ready, both mentally and physically, to play at a high level, then you want to get them on the field as much as you possibly can. So I think that will be important for us moving forward. Drew Shelton's ability to play both left and right tackle, which he's made dramatic improvements at right tackle from the spring, which was really important for us. Venga's a guy that we were able to redshirt last year, but we're going to need him to factor in for us as well. And then we got some young true freshmen that we hope that can be similar to what Shelton was last year. Again, maybe not in game 1, but try to speed that maturation process up as much as we possibly can. Hopefully by the middle of the season, game 4, game 5, whatever it may be. I think that's going to be important for us as well. And then we got some guys that create some position flexibility, like JB and others. That's going to be important too.
Hey James, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Back in town.
Yes, I'm here till the 10th.
10th. Welcome back.
Yes, thank you. And then I'll be back.
I don't think I ever told you your mom's cranberry sauce was really good. Did I ever follow up with you on that?
No, I don't think so. You still have the Tupperware, but
yeah, make sure you let Mom know.
I'll let her know.
Let Mom know. And you're correct. I do have the Tupperware dish.
You can afford it. Roster management, the transfer portal.
Yep.
Not to say that you're not being straightforward with guys over the course of the offseason, but there used to be the pragmatism of you could tell a guy in January, hey, I'm not sure whether or not you're going to play, and there were fewer things that they could do about it in terms of wandering off somewhere else. Now, if you go with February and say, not sure what the plan for you is in terms of starting, is that different now? I mean, I'm not saying that you would be misleading or that there's a sort of like smoke and mirrors here, but how does roster management change when guys can go out the door pretty much, not whenever they want, but in a different way than they used to be able to?
Yeah, that's where, to me, though, what I would say is it's not really, again, from my perspective, I know we all have different lenses on this stuff, and you guys have a very specific lens that's different than ours. But that's where, to me, the conversations with our guys is important. I would also say one of the areas we have changed is conversations with the parents. We would never talk to the parents before. Now we're willing to have those conversations, because if you don't, they're having their conversations and maybe making plans, and maybe they don't have all the information. So just being as transparent as you can, with the guys in the locker room, that really hasn't changed. But I do think there are people that may be approaching it publicly different. But for us, ultimately, it's about the young man having all of the information and seeing where he's at. I had a conversation with a young man last week about that topic that you're bringing up, and his dad. A very clear conversation about it. I had it, and then had it with the position coach as well, follow back up and say, hey, let's get together, because I've talked to the freshmen. All of the position coaches have talked to their guys. And then I said, well, I think there needs to be a follow-up conversation, because if you're saying that you don't completely know why you're not playing or starting or in the too deep, that shouldn't happen. It should have been stated. So let me have a follow-up meeting with myself, the position coach, and the young man to make sure there's no gray area and everybody sees it the same way and he is getting feedback. Because I would be shocked if he didn't, because I've asked my assistant coaches to give them very specific feedback so they know where they're at. So I guess to answer your question, internal to our program, it really hasn't changed. We're still giving the information that we have. But to your point, for me to have the conversation in January and December, I'm not going to tell anybody that. We lost a quarterback before this new transfer portal because I wouldn't make guarantees. So, that really hasn't changed.
All right. Thank you very much, Coach.
Thanks, guys.